In the days of the Persian Empire, when the king's word could shape the fate of nations, a shadow fell across the Jewish people. A decree was sealed with the royal signet ring, a decree born not from justice, but from the pride of one man. And as the news spread through the empire, fear spread with it. Families whispered, mothers wept, fathers prayed. Because one man refused to bow, an entire people were sentenced to die. His name was Haman, elevated by the king, honored above the nobles, yet ruled by a fragile pride. When Mordecai the Jew refused to bow before him, Haman's heart twisted with hatred. His anger grew into obsession, and obsession into a plan of genocide. He cast lots to choose the day of destruction, and he ordered a towering spike to be built, 75 feet high, intended for Mordecai's death, a monument to his ego. But Mordecai was no ordinary man. He was a guardian, a mentor, and the adoptive father of a young woman named Esther. He had raised her from childhood, guided her with wisdom, and taught her the ways to their people. And Esther was beautiful, not only in appearance, but in presence, in grace, in the quiet strength that drew the king's eyes the moment she entered his court. She rose from an orphan to queen. Yet she carried a secret no one in the palace knew. She never revealed her ethnicity. She never spoke of her people. She lived with a crown on her head and a hidden identity in her heart. When the decree of death was issued, Mordecai tore his clothes and stood at the palace gate in mourning. And through messengers, he told Esther the truth. He told her of Haman's plot. He told her of the spike built for his execution. And he told her the words that would define her destiny. Perhaps you were placed in the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther did not rush. She did not panic. She fasted. She prayed. She called her people to fast with her. And then, with courage wrapped in humility, she approached the king uninvited, knowing that one wrong step could cost her life. The king extended his scepter, and Esther began her strategy. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet, then another. She waited for the perfect moment. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers, "Not yet. Wait. Now." Meanwhile, the king could not sleep. And in the records of the kingdom, he discovered something long forgotten. Mordecai had once saved his life. He had exposed a plot against the king, and had never been rewarded. So the king summoned Haman and asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Blind by pride, Haman described the honor he wanted for himself, and the king commanded him to give that honor to Mordecai. So Haman, the enemy of the Jews, was forced to lead Mordecai through the streets, proclaiming his greatness publicly while hating him privately. It was the beginning of his downfall. At the second banquet, Esther revealed her identity. She exposed Haman's plot. She declared that she and her people had been sold to destruction. The king was enraged, and when he returned to see Haman falling at Esther's feet begging for mercy, his fate was sealed. The king ordered Haman to be impaled on the very spike he had built for Mordecai. The pride of one man had become the instrument of his own destruction. Haman's sons followed him into ruin. Pride does not only destroy a man, it destroys his legacy. But the decree of death could not be revoked. So the king issued a second decree. The Jews were allowed to defend themselves. And on the appointed day, March 7th, their enemies rose against them, but the Jews stood firm. They fought back, and they routed those who sought their destruction. What was meant to be a day of mourning became a day of victory. From that victory came a celebration, a feast, a new holiday called Purim, a reminder that God works behind the scenes, even when his name is not spoken. A reminder that deliverance can come through unexpected people, in unexpected ways. And so the story of Esther ends with joy, with triumph, with a people preserved, and with a truth that echoes through every generation. Pride is a silent poison. It blinds, it corrupts, it builds gallows for others but ends up hanging its maker. But faith, quiet, steady faith, moves unseen. God's hand is never absent, even when his presence is hidden. Esther teaches us that courage can be quiet, and deliverance can be disguised. And Haman teaches us that the sin of pride will always bring about your undoing. Listen now as the scene widens, and the camera of memory pulls back to the city of Susa, where marble and shadow meet, where courtyards hum with the low murmur of servants and the distant clatter of chariots. Imagine the palace at dusk, torches guttering, the king's hall a cavern of gold and silence. In that silence, decisions were made that would ripple like stones across the world. Mordecai, clothed in sackcloth, is not merely a man undone by grief. He is a sentinel who knows the cost of silence. He stands at the gate not to be seen, but to be heard. His mourning is a trumpet. His tears are a summons. When Esther receives his message, the weight of two worlds rests on her shoulders, the private grief of a people and the public splendor of a throne. She moves between them like a bridge. There is a moment in every story where time seems to hold its breath. For Esther, that moment is the approach to the king. The palace is a place of rules and rituals, where every step is measured, and every gesture can be fatal. To enter unbidden is to gamble with life. Yet she steps forward, not with the arrogance of youth, but with the resolve of one who has fasted and listened. Her courage is not a trumpet blast. It is a steady, small flame that refuses to be snuffed. The banquets she prepares are not mere feasts. They are stages where truth will be unmasked. She invites Haman and the king, and in the soft clink of goblets and the hush between courses, she weaves a story that will into a plot. The first banquet is a test. The second is the reveal. She times her words like a musician times a note. She waits until the king's heart is open, until the moment is ripe, and then she speaks. And when the king learns of Mordecai's past loyalty, the scales begin to tip. Pride, which once built Haman's ladder to power, becomes the very rope that will pull him down. The scene of Haman leading Mordecai through the streets is cinematic in its cruelty and irony. A man forced to honor the one he despises, to parade the dignity he would deny. The crowd sees the spectacle. Only a few see the moral unraveling. When Esther reveals her identity, the air changes. The queen who had hidden her people now stands in the full light of truth. Her words are simple and devastating, a plea for life, a naming of the plot. The king's rage is swift. Haman's fall is sudden. The spike he built, meant to pierce another's life, becomes the instrument of his own end. It is a grim symmetry that the story refuses to soften. But the tale does not end with a single act of vengeance. The law of the land, once written, cannot be erased. So a second decree is issued, not to kill, but to empower the threatened to defend themselves. On the appointed day, when the empire expects the Jews to be passive victims, they rise. They fight not for conquest but for survival. The victory is not merely military. It is moral. A people who were to be erased instead write their names into the calendar of celebration. Purim is born from that reversal. It is a festival of masks and noise, of reading and remembrance. It is a holiday that remembers how fragile power can be and how resilient faith is. It is a day when the hidden becomes visible, when the small acts of courage are celebrated as the turning points they were. Listen for the quieter lessons beneath the drama. Pride, when left unchecked, builds monuments to itself, spikes, palaces, proclamations. It blinds its owner to the humanity of others, and to the fragile threads that hold power together. Faith, on the other hand, often moves in silence. It fasts, it waits, it prays, it acts when the air is right. Not because it seeks glory, but because it seeks life. Esther's story is not only ancient history, it is a mirror. Each generation that reads it will find its own Haman and its own Mordecai. Each person who hears it will be asked, when will you speak? When will you risk? When will you stand between the hungry and the feast? Between the threatened and the indifferent? The final image is of a people who, against the odds, choose life. They gather, they remember, they feast. They tell the story to their children, and the children tell it to theirs. The memory becomes a shield and a song. The crown on Esther's head is heavy, but it rests on a heart that chose to be brave. So let the tale of Esther echo, that courage can be quiet, that timing matters, that pride devours its own. Let Purim be a reminder that deliverance can come through the most unlikely hands, and that the unseen hand of providence often works through the visible courage of ordinary people. If this retelling moved you, please like the video and subscribe for more dramatic narrations and reflections. Thank you for listening.